Harry would get into the car with Bernard and he would go to the hospital. Aunt May would also be at the hospital and she would be crying, looking at Peter, broken down and beaten. Harry would walk into the room and he would see MJ was there as well. Harry would look at Peter, seeing his hands were burned and parts of his arm and face were also burned. He would tell Aunt May he was sorry for everything that happened, and he would tell Aunt May that the man that did this was now fired. She would be crying, looking at Harry, not saying anything. Harry would put his head down, leaving the room. MJ would walk out of the room hugging Harry, and Harry would explain to her it was his choice making the experiment, and she would tell him what happened and Harry would explain everything to her. The doctors would tell Harry and Aunt May and MJ that they got Peter in a stable condition, but he won't be out of the hospital for another few weeks. They gotta put new skin grafts on him, and they also gotta repair some of the movements within his hands. They would give Aunt May the bad news, saying Peter had lost 40% of his movement in his hands from the accident, but they can save parts of his hands, but they will have to do it now quickly. Harry would tell Aunt May he would pay for it and that they were all going to be covered. He would say that he was really sorry, and Peter would slowly open his eyes just a crack to see Harry and MJ holding hands in the room, and he would try saying something, but they would rush him into the medical room. Harry would tell MJ he had to leave and clean up some stuff to see what went wrong with the wires. He would run out of the hospital, running into an alleyway. He would change into his Spider-Man costume, and he would start swinging to the school. He knew he needed to find Dr. Connors to learn more about the chemicals he was working on and why he sent them to Oscorp. He had a lot on his mind, and Harry was becoming stressed and overwhelmed to the point where he was thinking maybe being Harry Osborn and Spider-Man was impossible. He would swing to the school and crawl on the wall. He would open the door, sneaking into the rooms. He would look to see Kurt Connors was teaching a class. The bell would ring and Harry would wait until they all left the room. It would become silent in the room, and Dr. Connors would open a test tube up that were in green bottles. Spider-Man would use his web slowly and he would drop to the ground, asking what he was doing with those. Dr. Connors would look in shock, shutting the case, and he would tell Spider-Man what he wanted. Spider-Man would tell him he wants to know why his drugs and chemicals were at Oscorp. He would say you made a lot of people angry the other day and that you could have gotten a lot of people killed. Dr. Connors would tell Spider-Man that he had no choice and that the serum could have saved a lot of people like himself. He would tell Spider-Man it could regrow limbs and heal other people. I had to send my chemicals there to test it in a secure location, and Spider-Man would laugh, saying that was a really dumb idea. He would say the only thing I see is someone trying to cause trouble and use Oscorp for their own benefit. Kurt would tell Spider-Man that he worked with Norman Osborn, and he told Norman that once the cure was ready, he could bring it there and help make more of them for the average people. Spider-Man would yell at Kurt, telling him enough was enough, and he would use his webs, taking the briefcase, and Kurt would scream, and Spider-Man would take it, smashing it on the ground. He would say his life's work was ruined, and he would fall off of his chair, falling onto the ground, looking at Spider-Man. Harry knew this guy was nuts, and that the things he had were too dangerous to be kept lying around. He would say stay out of trouble, and Spider-Man would open the window door, leaving. He would swing away, thinking if he did the right thing and maybe intimidating him would finally stop him from doing this. He thought to himself, was he doing the right thing, smashing the guy's life work? Well, he did bring a lizard to Oscorp and almost killed a bunch of people. Harry thought he needed to take a break from being Spider-Man. It was getting to be too much trouble for him, and he thought he would take his chances to take Mary Jane out and talk things over. He felt bad for her and Peter. Harry would drive to MJ's and he would knock on the door asking if she wanted to go out for a drink. She would smile, saying yes, and he would open the car door. They would drive off and they would go onto the bridge where the traffic was really heavy, and Harry thought to himself, maybe I should just tell her the truth so I can avoid all this traffic and just swing to where we need to be. And MJ would ask Harry in the car if Peter was going to be okay, and he would say he's not sure. There would be a silence, and she would ask why he was bringing her out, and Harry thought that he had to tell her the truth about what he was feeling and how he felt about MJ. He would tell MJ after that day after the expo, he always felt different about her and that he had feelings for her. Dr. Connors in our timeline would be slipping, going slowly insane, and he couldn't believe what happened to him. His life's work that he could have saved millions with was destroyed by the so-called hero Spider-Man. He thought he would get his attention and he would challenge him. Dr. Connors would scream Spider-Man and he would inject himself with the last lizard serum. He thought to himself he would finish Spider-Man off and send the cure to Oscorp so that they could make tons more. He knew if he did this, he would be saving lives, or would he? MJ would smile, and right when she was about to say something, there would be a loud noise in the background. Screaming could be heard, and an explosion would go off, and it would be from behind the car on the bridge. An arm would fly in the air, and Harry would look through his car window to see the lizard eating and clawing people. The lizard would stab somebody sitting in a car, and he would slit his throat. Harry would get out of the car fast, and he would tell MJ to stay there. She would grab his arm, saying, "Don't leave me," and he knew the longer he waited, the more people were going to die. He would yell at her, telling her to stay in the car, and Harry would run, sliding onto cars. He would jump off of the bridge, dodging cars, and he would get into his Spider-Man outfit, swinging in. He would kick the lizard in the back, and he would smile, knowing his plan would work. The lizard would try lashing Spider-Man, but he would do a backflip, using his webs to catch the lizard's arm, but the lizard pulled his webs forward, and Spider-Man, he would be lashed in the arm. Lizard would use his tail, and he would hit Spider-Man in the gut, and he would go flying, falling to the ground. MJ would be screaming for Harry, but he wasn't there. She could see a giant lizard in the distance, and she knew that she had to get out of here before she was going to die. She would go back into the car, trying to start it, but Harry had the keys. She would hide into the car, going into the back seat. Spider-Man was down for the count, and he would try to get back up. He could hear people screaming for help, and the lizard would jump on the car, breaking the window. He would be thrown, and he would see an old man going out of the car. Right when he was about to kill him, Spider-Man would swing in, landing a kick to the lizard's face, and he would fall to the ground. Spider-Man would look at his jacket, and it would say Dr. Kirk Connors. Harry knew he must have taken the last serum for revenge. He would yell at the lizard, telling him he didn't want to do this, but he had no choice. The lizard would scream, and he would walk towards the car, and MJ was in that car. He would look inside, breaking into the window, and he would hear screaming, and the lizard would pick up the car, throwing it off the bridge. Harry would use his webs, catching it, and he would be holding onto the bridge while holding onto the car with his other hand. Harry would yell at the lizard, "Why is he doing this?" And he would try speaking, saying that he was going to take his life away by killing as many people as possible. He would smile, telling Spider-Man he can't save everyone. There would be a voice echoing, and a noise would be getting louder and louder. The man would say, "He can't save them, but my superior arms might be able to." Harry was just hanging on for the car, and MJ was about to fall with it, and the lizard would scream, and Otto Octavius with a trench coat and hat would start moving burned cars on the bridge. Lizard would slash Spider-Man's hand, and Harry would scream in pain. He would drop, falling with the car. He would use his webs in time to remove the car window, and he would jump in, saving MJ. She would be screaming, and Harry would turn around, using his back as safety for MJ, and Spider-Man would land on the car with his back, almost being crushed, and the lizard would look down below, smiling. Otto would use his arms, launching them at the lizard, and he would scream. The lizard would use his tail, doing a 540 in the air, but Otto would block the attack using his arms as a shield. Down below, the car was starting to sink into the water, and MJ would be screaming for help, trying to get anybody. She would look at Spider-Man, and she would see that he was knocked out, down for the count. She would take his mask off. She would cry, seeing that it was Harry Osborn. She didn't know what to think or even how to react to this. She would just drop to the ground, looking at the mask in the water. She knew that they were going to die soon, or even drown, and she didn't know what to do. She would have a flashback of the expo when he was bit by the spider, and it was all starting to add up. Harry would wake up to see the car was just about to sink in the water, and that he could see MJ holding his mask in the air, and he would look at her. Up on top, the lizard would slash Ock's arms, and he would be confused, and it would start sparking up. He would get mad, and he would launch them at the lizard, and he would start choking him to death. The lizard would use his giant claws, breaking free, and he would roll over onto one of the cars, and he would slash Otto in the back, and he would start screaming in pain. His neck was really hurt, and his chip that controlled the arms would be destroyed, and he would start screaming, and he would start yelling, not knowing what to do or what was going on. He was losing control. Doc Ock would turn around, stabbing his arms through the lizard's gut, and the lizard would drop to the ground dead. He would take the lizard's screaming body, and he would slam it onto the cars, finishing the job once and for all. The lizard would extend his hand, trying to crawl up, trying to get to his feet, but what happened was, Otto would take him, and he would snap his neck, and Otto would fall to the ground. MJ would kiss Harry, and he would be confused, saying, "You shouldn't have done that. I was protecting you and Peter from my dad and all of the monsters in the world." She would be happy, smiling, and Harry would tell her they would have to talk about this after, and he would take his mask on, putting it back on, and he would grab MJ, and they would swing up on top of the bridge. Spider-Man would look to see the lizard, and he was dead on the ground. He would would tell MJ to stay there, and he could see Otto got clawed in the neck and he was bleeding out, and Spider-Man would shout asking if he was okay, and Otto would look at Spider-Man telling him that he was fine, and Spider-Man would tell him, I guess we meet again fighting another giant lizard, and Otto would look at Spider-Man and he would use his arms walking away. Harry thought it was really strange that Otto ended up leaving almost like a robot. Harry would see Eddie Brock in the distance on the bridge taking pictures, and he couldn't believe it. Eddie would look at Spider-Man, and Spider-Man would look back at him, and he would run off getting into his car. He thought maybe he would follow him, and that he had that unfinished talk that he never really got to do. He would be interrupted by MJ, and she would ask how all this happened, and he would take her to a rooftop building. She would say to Harry, but you could have stopped him before, and Harry would look down, and he would say, that's why he's doing this, because he can never let this happen ever again. He can't let anyone else like Peter's uncle get killed. He would explain he wanted to tell Peter, and he knew Peter would take it the wrong way. MJ would tell Harry he needs to come clean, and Harry would look at her saying it's all true and that he's not lying about any of this, and that he didn't kill his uncle. She would look at him saying, you killed your father, and he would have a tear in his eye. He would have a flashback of his dad dying, and he would say, I'm not talking about this anymore. MJ would understand, and she would tell Harry his secret was safe with her, and she would smile. Harry would drop MJ off at her place, and he would start swinging away. He knew things were getting better for him, and he would start swinging, looking at the billboards. It had pictures of Otto killing the lizard, and it said Doc Ock Hero or Menace. Otto would be hiding out in the same abandoned warehouse that Norman and Harry fought in Spider-Man 2002. Otto could see bloodstains on the wall, knowing that this was recent. The arms would start taking control of his mind, telling him to rebuild the machine. He knew he couldn't walk into the doors at the front of the docks, telling them that he wanted the energy. He thought, what if he could just steal the equipment back? He thought that was a perfect idea. Bernard would clean Harry's arm from the attack from the lizard, and Bernard would tell Harry if the lizard was finally done, and Harry would nod his head, saying that that's one less supervillain to worry about. He would tell Bernard if it was the right thing to do by firing Otto Octavius, and Bernard would look at him, saying that it wasn't his fault, but he ended up getting somebody killed, and he almost got another employee killed. Harry told Bernard that he wanted to shut down the energy project once and for all, but he didn't know how he was going to do it or if it would hurt the company. Bernard would tell Harry he couldn't play with things that he didn't properly understand, and he told him that he should maybe wait. Bernard would fix his arm up, stitching it back up, and Bernard would tell Harry that there was a gift on the table. There would be a breaking news alert on TV though, saying that there was a new vigilante, Doc Ock, and that he was at the front gates of the docks where the newly built energy sustainer was. They don't know his intentions, and Harry would look at Bernard, and he would run towards the table, and he would see the gift. It was the new red and black Alex Ross suit. Bernard would smile, and Harry would put it on, leaving. He would swing into the city, and he could hear cop cars telling Doc Ock to stand aside, and Spider-Man would swing into action looking at the cops, and he would drop down, standing in front of them. Otto would smile at Spider-Man, and Otto said he was going to take revenge and kill Harry Osborn, and then he was going to steal back what was rightfully his. Otto would say Harry killed his wife and fired him all in the same day. He would be confused knowing that he didn't do any of that stuff to him or killing his wife. Spider-Man would ask if he was okay, and Otto would pick up 2 police cars with his arms, and Spider-Man with one last ditch effort would try to calm him down, but Otto would smile and he would throw the cars at Spider-Man. He would do a front flip over the cars, but one of them would smash into the docks. Spider-Man would see the lights flicker, and Harry would be looking, knowing something was off. Doc Ock would use his arms, grabbing Spider-Man, and he would smash him into the ground. There would be an explosion blowing up the docks, and Otto would go flying into the water. Spider-Man would crawl up, and he would look around, looking at the docks, seeing that it was all destroyed. There would be a breaking news story, and MJ would turn the TV on looking at the news. It would say Harry Osborn could have been killed at the docks, and that Doc Ock was on the run. Spider-Man would look around, but Doc Ock was gone. Doc Ock would go back to the abandoned warehouse, thinking to himself he's not a criminal, and the arms would tell him he was going to need money to build a new machine, showing the world his creations are far superior. He would smile. He thought he would use Harry's butler to get the rest of the tritium. He had to get it before the cops found him. Harry would make a public statement on live TV saying that Otto was fired and that they had to cancel the energy project because of the recent events. Bernard would say that's all and that there was no more questions, and they would go into the car. Bernard would tell the driver to go to the bank because they had to pay for Peter's hospital bills. They would go driving off, and Harry would walk into the bank looking around, and he would walk with Bernard. Harry would ask the teller for a bank transfer, and his spider sense would go off like crazy. He would say get down, and there would be a gunshot that would go off. Doc Ock would remove his jacket and he would punch a cop in the face, knocking him out. Bernard would move with Harry and Harry would look around running off. He would swing in as Spider-Man and Otto would throw bags of money at him. Spider-Man would dodge the attacks, telling Otto he wants to make this deposit, and he would use an uppercut in the face and he would tell him how about this transfer, and he would kick Otto in the face. But Otto would use his arms and Spider-Man would be thrown to the wall and Spider-Man would kick him in the face, cracking one of Ock's glasses. He would do a 360 and use his arms. They would smash into Spider-Man. Spider-Man would be thrown into a wall and he would drop to the ground, and Otto would take him, smashing him outside of the window. Otto would look around and he would see Bernard. He knew Harry was around somewhere and he would take Bernard with him. He would start yelling for Harry and Spider-Man would swing in, but Ock would tell him if he comes any closer, the old man's going to get his neck snapped, and Otto would say don't follow me or he dies. Spider-Man would swing home not knowing what to do. He has Bernard and Otto is going nuts. He would change into his clothes, walking into the room, looking around, seeing that the glass was fixed, and he would look into the mirror. He could see his dad. He would tell Harry he could still join him by killing Otto and taking what was rightfully his. His father would laugh in the mirror, but he would hear a knock at the door, snapping back into reality. He would open the door and it would be MJ. She would tell Harry she was worried about him, and Harry would say he has Bernard and now he wants to rebuild the machine that he just destroyed. MJ would say Peter will be out of the hospital soon, and Harry would say well that's one good news, and Harry would sit down looking around. He would say that Bernard is the only one who knows where the tritium is, and I don't think he's going to be giving it up. Otto would rebuild the machine in the warehouse. He had Bernard tied up to a chain, and he would walk up to Bernard telling him where the rest of the tritium was, and he would say he didn't know, and Otto would scream saying it was the wrong answer, and he would slap him in the face with a metal arm. He would get knocked out, and Otto thought he would go to the Osborn residence house and pay his old boss a little visit. He knew he had to get Peter though. Without Peter, this would be useless. He was the only one who had been able to stabilize the tritium. He would look outside, seeing the sunset, and he would grab his coat, going to the hospital. Harry would turn the TV on, listening to all of the breaking news, and he didn't know what to do. MJ would tell Harry to get some rest and that he can't do anything right now, even if he wanted to. Harry would open a bottle of alcohol up and he would walk outside, looking at the city. He would start drinking. His spider sense would go off and a metal arm would shoot from the air, hitting him in the face. He would roll over and he would be hit to the ground and his spider sense would go off. MJ would scream running towards Harry and he would start yelling at her, telling her to get back and start running. She would run, but Otto would grab her by the foot and he would smash her into a wall. Otto would tell Harry he wants the tritium, and if he doesn't get it, he's going to let his little butler rot and die, and that he was going to kill MJ right here and right now. Harry knew there wasn't much of a choice he had to do it. He couldn't take the risk of letting his identity get out. Harry would walk towards the painting of his father, and he would open the door, pressing a couple buttons, and it would open the safe. Otto would shove him out of the way, and he would use his arm, smashing Harry's shoulder into the wall, and he would go flying, being incapacitated. Otto would take MJ by the neck, and he would leave with her, with the tritium. Harry would crawl up, getting to his feet, and he would slowly look at his costume, and he would put it on, swinging. Harry thought that he should never drink and swing. That was rule number 1, and he would slowly follow Otto as Spider-Man. Spider-Man would swing near the old abandoned warehouse where he couldn't believe his eyes. It's where it all started. Otto was using that place as his hideout, and he would get flashbacks of his father dying, and he would slowly follow Otto there. Harry would walk from the back of the entrance, remembering what his father said to him, and if it was a ghost that was in this very building. He could hear voices. He would hear Peter. He would be confused. Harry would use his webs crawling up the wall. He could see Otto working on the machine, and Peter would be talking to him. MJ would scream at Peter, telling him to let her go, but Peter would keep working, not saying a word. Otto would say that we can't just do that right now, because then I would have to kill somebody if I ended up letting you go. Peter would tell Otto he was unsure if this was going to work, and he would yell at Peter, telling him to turn the machine on, and Peter would listen, doing as he said. Peter at this time would be good, and he would be able to leave the hospital, like he was about 50% recovered. The beams would go off, and it would cast a shadow of Spider-Man crawling. Otto would use his arm, smashing them into Spider-Man, and he would start laughing. Spider-Man would fall to the ground, and Spider-Man would yell at Otto, crawling to his feet, and he would tell him he was dealing with power that he didn't fully understand. If he doesn't do it right this time, there's going to be no way of stopping it. He would look around to see Bernard with his head down and MJ tied up. Spider-Man would yell at Peter to stop, and he would ignore him. He would just keep working on the machine. Spider-Man would try to reason with Peter, telling him not to turn the machine off, and he would swing in trying to save MJ and Bernard, but Doc Ock would use his arms and it would hit Spider-Man and he would go flying into a wall, almost falling on his back. He would be on the ground. Peter would start the machine up, but Spider-Man would do a front flip and Otto would be confused and he would try to hit him with his arms, but he would dodge the attack and the arms would go onto the machine. Spider-Man would try taking the tritium in time, but Peter in time would start it up and he would boot the machine. One of the energies would spike up and it would hit Harry in the face and he would scream in pain. It would go bouncing onto his right side of his mask. He was almost burned. Peter would say the levels were sustaining and the metal pieces in the room were starting to fly into the machine and Otto couldn't believe it. He failed. He would tell Peter to lower the power and he would start yelling at Peter. Spider-Man would crawl up and Peter would look at him. He couldn't even believe his eyes. He could see Spider-Man's half-burned mask from the machine and it was Harry Osborn. Everything just hit Peter right then and there and Peter would cry, having tears in his eyes, shouting Harry, and Harry would say, "It's not what it looks like," and Otto would yell saying Peter was useless and he would try turning the power down himself. He would use his arms, throwing Peter aside, and he would fall to the ground. Otto would try using his arms, but Spider-Man would dodge the attack and he would use his webs, pulling the wires up, and it would go into Otto's body and he would be electrocuted, sent back into a wall. The machine was getting bigger and bigger and Harry would rush in time, saving Bernard and Mary Jane. He would tell Bernard to get out of here as fast as possible with Mary Jane. Harry would swing towards Peter that was on the ground, almost bleeding. He would whisper, saying that "you killed my uncle," and Harry would say there are bigger things happening here. He would say the machine is going to overload, destroying the city with your aunt in it. Peter would look around, telling Harry it can't be stopped, and Harry would tell Peter, "Remember, about great power must also come great responsibility." And Peter would pick himself up, getting to his feet, and he would try running to the machine. He would start shutting parts of it down. Otto would see this and he would use his arms and he would grab Harry by the neck. He would start choking Harry. He would scream saying, "You took everything from me," and Peter would look at Otto, knowing that he also took everything from him too. Harry would extend his hand, telling Peter to do it now, and Peter would take a step back from the machine and Harry would be confused. Harry would use his webs at Ock and he would pull him towards the machine and his arms would be melted off. He would be screaming in pain and Peter would shut it down in time. The machine would still blow up and Harry would look at Peter and the warehouse would finally go boom. Harry would grab Peter in time and he would save him. Harry would crawl out of the burning rubble and he would see Peter on the ground. He would see if he was okay and he could see that he just made it out in time. He would be knocked out and Harry would get up looking at the fire. He could see a skeleton and it was Otto Octavius. He was dead. He was burned to death from the explosion. Harry would slowly get back up, getting to his feet, and he would pick up Peter and he would drop him off at the hospital. Harry would go home taking his bloody mask off and Bernard would tell him to get some rest. Harry knew he did it once again. He defeated Ock and now he thought to himself there are going to be bigger challenges ahead of him with Peter and now MJ. He didn't know what to think. MJ would knock at the door and she would smile at Harry. He would put a suit on, hearing sirens and a massive explosion from the sky. He would swing into action not knowing what was going on. Peter would recover from everything that happened and he knew what he had to do. Peter would knock on the Osborn residence house, but nobody was home. He knew that he had to talk to Harry. He would kick the door down and everything would be silent. He would walk further into the hallway, hearing a voice. It was Norman's voice and he could hear laughing. The voice would tell Peter to open the door and he would look within the door, looking into the mirror. He would open the mirror and he could see himself and he could see Norman Osborn. Another voice would be heard and it would say, "Pete, don't do this," and Pete would smile, opening the door, and the mirror would flip open. And that is going to be What If Harry Osborn Got Bit by the Spider, Spider-Man 2. So I hope you guys enjoyed this really highly incredible fan fiction. It was crazy to make this one. Like, this took a really long time. There was a lot of takes, a lot of requests. A lot of you guys have been taking requests, so I really do appreciate it. I will try to get to a lot of them because I have a lot to do. I want to do a couple fan-made stories that I did get requests for, so I want to do those as well. But I'm really happy that you guys really like part 1 and 2, so I really hope this part 3 of What If Harry Osborn Got Bit by the Spider and Spider-Man 2, where he pretty much becomes like fully Spider-Man. I hope you guys enjoyed this one, and I hope it beat part 1 and 2 for you. And as always, guys, do make sure to subscribe, like, share, and turn your notifications on so you and your friends are all up to date with the latest content. But anyways, as always, guys, thanks for tuning in and have an amazing day.